Welcome to the CGVR Study Lab's thesis preparation video. In this video we're going to talk about headings. So when you're creating your thesis structure, your index, the table of contents, you might have something like this. So the first chapter is introduction, then we have background, we are making Duck Hunt VR game, maybe some results and a summary. Now this table of contents or this index has several problems. First of all, what background? Don't just list background, because background, well, you're gonna have background, foreground, midground, it's just too arbitrary general term. Instead, say exactly what background are you talking about. You're talking about shooter games in virtual reality. This chapter will include an overview of different shooter games in virtual reality, and by the end we can see that okay, there are these examples in the market and there is a niche where our Duck Hunt VR game would go to. So be explicit on what actual background you're providing. Now there are some caveats here. There could be many different subchapters under this background, which don't really have a common title or a common parent that we can categorize them under. In that case, you can think about maybe they should be separate main chapters. Maybe we should have a virtual reality chapter where we talk about virtual reality, and then we might have shooter games in virtual reality as a separate chapter. But then we have to think about, like, do we really need a main chapter for just describing virtual reality? Is that lengthy chapter really important to give the understanding of why we made Duck Hunt VR, or even how we made it? Maybe it's not that important, maybe it is. Depends on the thesis. So to recap, if you have many different subchapters, then think about, do they have a common parent heading? If not, maybe they should be separate main chapters, or maybe some of that background information is not truly necessary in that length. Maybe we can have just in the introduction what is VR, and that is sufficient. Then when we're creating those headings, always remember you already have a title of your thesis. Maybe the title of your thesis already is Duck Hunt VR, a virtual reality shooter game. So it doesn't really make sense to have another chapter called Duck Hunt VR. Instead, maybe the thing you want to talk about is the design of your game. So your title would be the design. What design? Well, the design. The design you made, the design of Duck Hunt VR, the main title. So writing this T here specifies that this is the design of the main title of your thesis project. Similarly, maybe you just don't want to talk about the design, which probably is the most important part, but maybe you also want to write about the architecture or implementation, or maybe you made some very complicated solutions technically there. So then you would have another chapter, the architecture, the implementation, whatever it is. And again, we start with the because, well, it relates to the main title. Next, we have these results. So what is this results? Instead of results, we usually have the testing. So we're testing our software product, and underneath that heading, we can have subheadings, subchapters. For example, we might do usability testing on actual users to see if they enjoy the game, or performance testing to see if it runs well on different platforms, some common hardware that virtual reality players have. So it could be very important testing for a virtual reality game. The specific testing that you have there is up to you, and it depends largely on your problem statement. What game are you making and why are you making it? What problem is it trying to solve? And you test against that problem. And lastly, well, we have this summary. So name that last number title conclusion. Because summary is something that is already on the second page. So in the end, you will have your title page, and then you basically have your summary page or abstract page. This is basically your summary. The chapter you have is conclusion. You're concluding your work. So your thesis starts with one introduction. We are leading the reader into the topic. Then we are exploring the background. So we're telling the reader, look, there are these shooter games and there is this virtual reality, and we're trying to make something for that market. Then we explore how we make something potentially valuable for that market. Then we do the testing, we see, is it really valuable, are we achieving our goals that we set out? And then we conclude our work. And we will speak about later, like what should be in the conclusion, but the last number chapter, usually I recommend to name it conclusion, because you really do want to conclude just like you introduced in the beginning. So your actual index or structure or table of contents would be introduction, then some explicit background chapter, then the design, the implementation, the testing, some different testings, and conclusion. And of course, for different types, this would be different, but I really do recommend you to have explicit titles that say what exactly is in that chapter. And I also recommend you to have numbers starting from 1, introduction, ending with 6, conclusion, or whatever the last number is. Because the introduction and conclusion, they are still part of your written thesis. You're introducing and concluding. The next chapters that you would have, the references and appendix and so on, those would be unnumbered. But the numbered chapters, I would say, would be these. So the takeaway from this video is that, well, these headings, they are likely to change as well throughout the work. You might have some table of contents right now. Maybe in a month or two you will see that, oh, I really need to talk about virtual reality because this is integral to my design. So you will add a virtual reality chapter somewhere where you explore the virtual reality aspect or some other background aspect. Or you might see that, well, I'm doing this particular testing, so I will need these particular subchapters. Or in the design, maybe you have, well, the game design part, and then maybe you have the level design or narrative design, depending on what your game is focusing on. Have meaningful headings, so don't just write arbitrarily background, method, results. If you're making a product, these are too arbitrary and they don't really convey what is actually in the subchapter, what is written there. So those headings, they should already say, look, this is virtual reality shooter games. If you want to know about those, read this subchapter. This is the design. This is level design. If you want to read about level design, go to here. Under design, there's level design, not methodology. And well, of course, different types have different structures and headings. For example, if you have experiment type thesis, you could have the experiment methodology. So there, this is explicitly what you will write about. So be mindful of your headings, and also I recommend you to write those headings out. One of the first tasks in VisualLearn actually has you create your index, your structure, because then you basically structure out your plan and you know what are the different steps you're going to have to do for finishing your thesis.